What's your secret that could literally ruin your life if it came out? Story 1. This story isn't something that ruined my life, but it's something I've never told anyone. I hope it doesn't get overlooked because I believe there's a message in it that could be valuable to others. For context, I'm a male in my mid-20s, with no history of severe abuse like many of the stories I've read. I've lived a fairly typical suburban life in the Midwest. My dad is of Hispanic and Caribbean heritage, and my mom is a white American with distant Irish ancestry. I have a somewhat uncommon, distinctly Hispanic last name. Physically and culturally, though, I lean more toward the white side of my background. When I was 14, I went to a sleepaway camp in the Southwest U.S., the same camp my dad attended over 30 years earlier. This was my first time staying away from my family for more than a weekend. I was both excited and a bit nervous. I looked forward to activities like horseback riding, leatherworking, and archery. What I didn't expect was to experience violent racism. On the second night, after everyone had made friends and settled down, it was time to head to the bathhouse to get ready for bed. I vaguely remember someone blocking the doorway as I entered, and as I went to the line of urinals, I was ambushed. 4 or 5 older campers, maybe around 16 or 17, threw me against the wall and then onto the ground. I couldn't stop myself from peeing, which only added to my humiliation. They took turns kicking me, yelling what sounded like insults in Spanish. Although I couldn't understand the words, the tone was anything but friendly. One of them even urinated on me during the attack. When they were done with the physical assault, they switched to English to continue their insults. These boys were Mexican, and they assumed my last name must be fake because I didn't look like them or speak Spanish fluently. They seemed determined to teach me a lesson about being Hispanic. Though I can't remember their exact words, I know they were deeply hurtful. The whole incident lasted about 5 to 10 minutes. Afterward, I got in trouble with the camp staff for being late to bed. I was hiding in one of the showers, still fully clothed, trying to wash away the night's events as I cried. This wasn't my first experience with bullying, but it was the one that changed my life the most. From that day on, I felt a deep desire to learn more about my heritage. I begged my parents to take family trips to my dad's homeland, and I wanted to visit my grandparents as often as possible. I did everything I could to connect with my Hispanic and Caribbean roots, not to prove myself to anyone else, but to understand my identity on my own terms. To this day, 10 years later, I don't know who those boys were, and I've never held this experience against the Mexican community. The actions of a few don't define an entire culture, and that's something I've held on to. Racism is still present in many forms, not just the ones commonly shown in the media. If you witness it, please step in and stop it. Story 2. When I was 16, I reconnected with my aunt through my uncle, who is my dad's younger brother. We would visit their large house by the lake every summer, and it always felt like a getaway with family. Over time, I developed feelings I didn't quite understand, especially as my aunt was incredibly kind and supportive of me. One evening, we shared a conversation that felt a little too close, and I found myself confused by the emotions I was experiencing. She was always there for me, and in a way that brought us together in ways that were difficult to navigate. Our relationship developed a complicated side, one that I never intended to pursue but didn't know how to walk away from. This continued during the times I would visit, and it became our secret. My uncle was often away for work, and we maintained the facade of normalcy, with me helping out with my younger cousins like a big brother. It's a difficult experience to carry, knowing that secrets like these affect more people than just ourselves. I've never told anyone, but it's something I often think about as I try to make sense of the complexities of family, loyalty, and personal boundaries. Story 3. Everyone sees me as a responsible, academically focused student. In high school, I was known as the polite, well-mannered kid who never broke any rules. But my life outside of school has had its challenges, ones I've had to keep private. At 15, I had my first encounter with self-defense that required more than words. Growing up, I faced difficulties, often alone since I was on my own from a young age. I had to work odd jobs to cover my expenses and even got involved in dangerous situations just to make ends meet. I began to make money through various means, learning the hard way how to survive and save up, even investing to build a college fund. My life has been a blend of survival and ambition, constantly balancing right and wrong. Now in college, I work as an assistant in finance, helping with tasks that sometimes push boundaries, but allow me to support myself. I have also struggled with substance use as a way to manage stress. Over time, I'm working on healthier ways to cope, like using therapy and new routines to ease my mind. Life has tested me in many ways and I've made mistakes. I'm working hard to keep up with college and make a future for myself. People often think they know me, but there's a lot behind the surface that they'd never guess. I'm doing my best to move forward and leave behind the parts of my life that held me back. Story 4. This is my first time posting here, so if I'm not doing it quite right, bear with me, please. I've been reading through these threads since seeing a post about it on Tumblr, and this morning, I decided to share my story. Last year, around March or April, a guy from my college mentioned there was an opening at his job where he worked part-time as a manager. I was looking for new work since my current job at a salon wasn't going well. Some of the stylists had started bullying me. I agreed to take the job offer. This guy had asked me out a few times before, but I had always politely declined, and he seemed to accept it without issue. However, on my first day at the new job, he acted inappropriately multiple times throughout the workday. During my lunch break, after already being uncomfortable, I ended up picking a small argument with my partner, which led to a breakup. I went back to work, but the behavior continued. Later that night, I texted him to let him know I wouldn't be returning, without mentioning what happened. He called, but I didn't answer, and while he sounded hurt, he agreed. After that, I started driving to school instead of using public transit, since he knew my schedule. I deleted and blocked him from all social networks in my phone. In August, I found a new job that I truly enjoy, and I left the unpleasant salon job behind. My partner and I got back together in July, and I shared a simplified version of what happened that day. He urged me to report it, especially since I was worried about other employees there who might have experienced the same thing. But I didn't go through with it. Not long after, an older man, probably in his 50s, started working at my current job. The first time we worked together, he seemed friendly, but then he went to my friend who got me the job and asked about my background. Later, he told me that his wife was also Cuban. Eventually, I learned through others that his wife had actually passed away, which struck me as a bit odd, but understandable. Ever since then, he's tried to speak to me in Spanish whenever possible. Simple, Spanish 101 level phrases. It felt a little strange, but I figured he was just trying to be friendly, so I played along. Soon he started calling me señorita regularly, which made me uncomfortable. He often stands too close or brushes past me. My job involves a lot of movement, so he's often nearby, watching. Once, while I was reaching for something, he reached for it too and grabbed my hand. I froze for a moment before pulling away, and he let go. Since then, there hasn't been any more physical contact, but the constant attention and overly friendly conversations still make me uncomfortable. I've told my partner and a few friends about him, framing it as a funny, weird guy at work story without sharing how much it actually bothers me. I haven't told my boss, though she's supportive, because I'm worried I might be overreacting given my past experiences. And if I brought it up now with no proof, I fear it could somehow lead to people doubting my credibility. Another part of my story is about my family. They kicked me out after they found out I was dating my boyfriend again, someone they disapprove of because of his background. They were certain I came back pregnant after a recent visit to see him. Despite their assumptions, we haven't been intimate. My boyfriend respects my boundaries. And while he may think I'm reserved due to my upbringing, that's not entirely it. My past experiences have made me wary of relationships, and intimacy still feels difficult. What really troubles me, though, and this is something I haven't shared with anyone else, is that recently, when I'm alone and reflecting on old memories, I'll remember simple things from high school, like silly adventures or my first kiss. But sometimes, I'll recall vague images that I don't fully understand, memories that feel real but distant, like a man reaching toward me in a way that feels deeply unsettling. These fragments haunt me, and while I try to shake them off, they linger, leaving me to question my past and the impact it may have on my present. Story 5. I've never shared this with anyone, not even my therapist or the closest people in my life. Making this post feels like my first attempt at saying it, even if it's just written down. I recently started therapy and was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, but I'm not sure if that explains everything. My secret is that I have been living a lie for years, a lie that I've constructed and maintained, even to those closest to me. It began in high school when I was dating someone, and as our relationship grew strained, I started telling him that I was using drugs, though I wasn't. I told him I was using substances like heroin and meth, despite having never touched them. My story became so detailed that I even convinced others I was constantly drinking. To support this lie, I told friends and family that I was going to rehab. During a summer break, I locked myself in my room, using fake online accounts to talk to friends as if I were in treatment. I would log into my real accounts for short periods, pretending that I had limited internet access. My dad agreed not to take any calls from me, making it easier to keep up the act. When I returned from this fake rehab, I cut ties with my boyfriend, claiming he was an enabler. Later, I would periodically reestablish contact to manipulate the situation, claiming I'd started using again because he preferred me that way. I even created imaginary friends, claiming they were real people who had introduced me to drugs. I would go to school pretending to be high or drunk, and my dad transferred me to a charter school when my grades started dropping. At one point, someone from the new school doubted my story. To convince him, I used makeup to draw track marks on my arms, covering them with a jacket until I revealed them to him in a moment of feigned vulnerability. After that, he believed me completely, even advising me on how to hide things from doctors. I even went to parks and pretended to black out to further my lie. Now, years later, I tell people I've been clean for about 5 years. I talk about the struggles of cold turkey rehab and the hard journey of recovery. I even created tragic endings for 2 of the 3 imaginary friends from my past, claiming one overdosed and another passed away from illness. I still have friends who supported me through my addiction and recovery. They even mourned with me over the loss of these imaginary friends. If I were to reveal the truth now, I fear they'd feel completely betrayed and would cut me out of their lives. There's a part of me that dreams of starting over somewhere else, where I can tell my real story. But I'm deeply in love with someone who has supported me through all of my struggles, and it's hard to let go. I'm also grappling with depression because I feel an overwhelming fear that if anyone ever discovered the truth, I wouldn't be able to handle it. It's a constant internal battle, one that I don't know how to escape. Story 6. My boyfriend's grandfather made an unwanted advance toward me, and it's something that's affected our relationship with his family. My boyfriend has been living with his grandparents to save up before we move in together, and over the 2 years we've been together, I became very close to them. They felt like a second set of grandparents to me. One day, while my boyfriend was at work and his grandmother was at a dentist appointment, I was woken by a knock on the bedroom door. His grandfather came in and, to my surprise, got under the covers and placed a hand on my thigh. He made an inappropriate comment about having a little fun. Stunned and uncomfortable, I told him no very firmly. He quickly got up, told me to go back to sleep, and warned me not to tell anyone. When my boyfriend came home, I told him immediately. He confronted his grandfather, who only responded with a nonchalant, "Okay." We decided not to tell his grandmother or anyone else in the family, but I haven't visited their home since, and during family gatherings I avoid being near him. I'm 24 now, and this happened when I was 23. It's been difficult to reconcile my feelings, especially knowing that he was once a respected city policeman who won awards for his service. It's painful to know that he would act this way toward his grandson's girlfriend, betraying the trust we all placed in him. Story 7. I don't expect anyone to read this, but I need to get it out. I've never told anyone any of this before, and I probably never will again. It may not seem as intense as other stories, but it's enough to make me feel like I'm constantly fighting my own mind. I can't shake the feeling that everything that's happened is something I brought upon myself, and it's hard to live with that. My first experience with anything related to intimacy was when I was very young. My friend next door was a bit older, and I looked up to her so much. She was the coolest person in my world. We spent years hanging out, until one day my mom found out things weren't as innocent as they seemed. I don't remember much, and it feels like a faded memory, but I know it's real. Whenever we were alone, she would sometimes act out in ways that hurt, but I didn't know how to say no. She was my only friend, and I didn't want to lose her. Looking back, I realized she was just repeating the things that had likely happened to her. It took me years to see how much that affected me and still plays a role in who I am today. Years later, when I was a teenager, I opened up to someone romantically. I was 15, and he was a bit older. I really liked him and thought he cared for me, but he was just playing a game with me. Eventually, he pressured me into things I wasn't ready for, but I didn't feel like I could say no. I wanted to feel loved, even if it was on his terms. But after a few weeks, he disappeared from my life, leaving me heartbroken. After that, I kept looking for someone to fill that empty space. I ended up with people who didn't care about me, and it left me feeling even worse about myself. In that whirlwind of seeking validation, I started drinking to get through the nights, and I fell back into old habits of self-harm. I felt like I had no control over my life, just trying to feel wanted but ending up feeling used. Eventually, I realized I had missed a period, and weeks went by with no sign of it. Coming from a religious family, the fear of facing my parents with the possibility of pregnancy was overwhelming. I prayed every night for things to go back to normal. When the next month came and I wasn't pregnant, I felt like I'd been given a second chance. I promised myself I'd make a fresh start. That fall, I started at a new school and tried to turn things around. I quit self-harming, but the self-doubt and feelings of worthlessness stayed. I wanted to feel better, to feel like I had value. But I kept falling into the same patterns, searching for love and acceptance from people who didn't care about me. I thought about ending the pain, but I kept hoping that things would eventually change. I just want the torment to stop. I want to be free of the guilt, the self-doubt, and the sense of emptiness. I want someone to genuinely love me, not just use me. I don't expect anything to come from this, but putting it into words feels like a way to begin processing it all. Story 8. I'm finding some relief in the fact that there are thousands of comments here, making it feel like my story can be shared without too much spotlight. I made a separate account just for this because it's not something I've ever shared before. Here goes. I'm fairly certain that at a very young age, I experienced things I didn't understand with an older cousin. She had me do things that, looking back, I didn't comprehend at the time, but I thought I was just making her happy. As I grew older, I noticed that my preferences were somewhat influenced by that experience, though I try not to dwell on it. When I was about 10, I had a close friendship with a family friend's daughter, and we would sometimes play a game called Pillow. It was innocent enough in concept, but as we got older, it became more complicated, and our parents eventually separated us, sensing things might not be healthy. Over time, we drifted apart. Later, as a young teen, I babysat for another family friend. The girl I watched over had been exposed to things I didn't know at her age, and there were a few uncomfortable incidents between us when I was about 13. I think our respective experiences might have contributed to her struggles, as she later faced personal challenges of her own. I felt a lot of guilt about that, wondering if my presence made things harder for her. These experiences have shaped my adult relationships in complex ways. I often feel like I either idealize someone, always wanting to please, or view relationships as temporary, focused on a physical connection rather than a genuine emotional one. I'm not sure why I find it difficult to balance the two, but I'm working on understanding myself better and creating healthier dynamics. Sometimes, I feel like I'm still working through these early influences in my life. Story 9. For 2 years, I made money by selling personal items like my used clothing to help fund my studies. At the time, it seemed like a relatively easy way to cover my expenses, and I set up a small online page where I could do this anonymously without showing my face or revealing too much of my identity. In some ways, it was simple work. But over time, I noticed that many of the people purchasing from me seemed to be dealing with personal issues, and some started confiding in me. I found myself spending a significant amount of time responding to messages, trying to offer encouragement or support. For some, I became a sort of confidant, even though we never met in person and only communicated online. I ended up investing much of my working time responding to emails rather than maintaining the site itself. A few people even asked me to write personal letters, which they'd keep beside their beds. A month ago, I decided to stop. I closed my page and left a note saying not to reach out. Recently, I learned that one of the people I interacted with has been going through a rough time, and I feel guilty knowing that he depended on the encouragement I'd been providing. I'd encouraged him to seek professional help several times, but he always seemed to prefer our chats. Originally, my goal was just to make ends meet while studying, not to get deeply involved in people's lives. Now I'm wondering if I should start selling again, as I still have 3 years of school left and my funds are running low, but I worry about getting drawn into the same cycle of personal connections. I'm also uncertain if I still feel comfortable with the idea of doing this kind of work now. It's a tough choice, and I'm trying to figure out the best path forward, balancing my financial needs with my own boundaries and respect for myself. Story 10. First off, this is one of the most remarkable threads I've ever come across. The amount of truth and honesty here is incredible. I figured I'd share my story because it's something I've kept to myself, but it would be devastating if anyone close to me ever found out. When I was 17, I worked at an ice cream shop with a guy named Charlie. He was in his early 20s, one of the nicest people I'd met, and I looked up to him a lot. Charlie was dating Lisa, who was 21. She was funny, charming, and attractive. The three of us became close friends, and to stay connected, I even joined an online game that she and Charlie played. Over time, Lisa and I started talking more, messaging back and forth and filling out those long, personal questionnaires people share online. Things took an unexpected turn at a Halloween party at their place. Lisa had a few drinks, and while we were alone, she tried to kiss me. Even though I liked her, I was shocked and didn't want to cross that line, so I quickly excused myself. Later, I asked Charlie to take me home, with Lisa sitting close to me in the truck, and I did my best to ignore the mixed feelings I had. Afterward, Lisa and I continued talking online. I realized I wanted to be with her, and a few months later, we took our relationship to the next level. I told her I loved her, even though I wasn't sure I fully understood what that meant at the time. From that point, we maintained a secret relationship, seeing each other whenever we could. The next fall, I went off to college, and Lisa and I kept up our relationship still in secret. Eventually, she told me she'd broken up with Charlie, who had since moved to another state. I still didn't bring our relationship out into the open because I worried about how my family would react, especially since they knew how we'd met. Over time, though, college became overwhelming, and I felt like I couldn't keep up with everything. I started doubting myself and felt like I wasn't good enough for her. In my mind, I convinced myself that she'd be better off without me, so I stopped answering her calls and emails. She left a voicemail asking me what went wrong and if we could at least stay friends. But I didn't respond, even though I knew I'd regret it. What weighs on me the most is that Lisa was the only person I've truly loved. I've been in relationships since, but none have felt the same. With Lisa, I felt like we were genuinely connected, no matter where we were. Now I struggle with relationships, often comparing new people to her, and wondering what might have been. A part of me wants to apologize, to tell her I was scared and that I made a mistake, but I'm still afraid of facing those feelings. It's been almost 3 years since we last spoke, and I'm doing my best to move forward, but I often think of her when I go to sleep at night. If she ever reached out, I don't know if I'd have the courage to respond. So, for now, I'm just working on finding closure on my own. Thanks for letting me share this here. Story 11. I have a secret I've never shared before. I was a thief in high school. I learned skills like pickpocketing, lockpicking, and running small cons, mostly from online tutorials. Over time, I'd take things like phones, wallets, car keys, and other valuable items from people's lockers. But what started as just an adrenaline rush soon turned into something I hadn't anticipated. Through reading messages, emails, and personal information on some of the things I took, I started learning about hidden parts of people's lives. I stumbled across things that surprised and disturbed me. I learned about a senior who had been involved in a fatal drunk driving accident, a freshman who was dealing with an unexpected pregnancy, and even a group of students planning something horrible against a classmate. That last one was where I felt compelled to step in, so I sent an anonymous tip to the police, hoping to prevent a tragedy. Over the 3 years I continued this, I was able to intervene in a few situations. I anonymously prevented 2 assaults, helped a student who was showing signs of extreme behavior get help, and even stopped a football player from using performance enhancers that his parents had pressured him into taking. I never revealed my methods because I knew that if people found out what I was doing, they would hide things from me, and I'd lose the chance to help anyone else. Looking back, I realized that I didn't have the maturity or perspective to handle everything I uncovered. I was a high school kid with my own struggles, suddenly burdened with secrets that weighed heavily on me. Even now, I sometimes have nightmares about some of the things I couldn't prevent, and I avoid high school reunions because it's hard to look at some of those people, knowing what I know. This isn't something I'm proud of, but I wanted to let it be known that I tried to make a difference, even in my own flawed way. Story 12. When I was 13, I became close friends with an 11-year-old boy from my neighborhood. We spent a lot of time together, and we grew to be best friends, often having sleepovers at each other's houses. We were both young and still figuring things out, and during this time, we crossed some boundaries that we didn't fully understand. Looking back, I see how complicated that time was for both of us. In July of that year, his father unexpectedly passed away from a heart attack. It was a difficult time, and I was the only close friend he had to lean on. We spent a lot of time together, and I tried to be there for him as best as I could, even though we were both still kids trying to process everything. Then one day in September, I went with him and his mother to his grandparents' house. We were in a den together when his aunt walked in and saw us under a blanket. The situation was awkward, and she reacted strongly, bringing in his mother and grandparents. They were extremely upset, and it turned into one of the most humiliating experiences I've ever gone through. After that, his mother contacted my dad, and they had a difficult conversation. My dad picked me up shortly after, and we drove home in silence. I knew he was probably as shocked as I was. When I got home, I went straight to my room, not knowing how to process any of it. I thought that was the end of things. But later, we received a letter saying that my friend's mother was pressing charges. It was hard to believe that things had escalated to this point. I learned that she'd taken him to a therapist and eventually filed a report. In court, I had to explain my friendship and everything that had happened in detail. Sitting in that courtroom and sharing personal experiences was incredibly difficult, especially with my parents and his family present. For several months, I was on house arrest and wore an ankle bracelet, only able to go to school and back home. Eventually, the judge decided that I would stay in a juvenile detention center until the final hearing. I spent about 3 weeks there, feeling completely out of place and uncertain about the future. After the final court session, I was released and allowed to go back to school. Those months had taken a toll on me, and I felt isolated, as if I had disappeared without warning. I explained to my friends that I had been away, but the whole experience left a lasting impact. Looking back, I understand that his mother acted out of concern for her son, wanting to protect him as best as she could. It was a complicated time for all of us, and it took me years to process and move forward. Story 13. So I was on a trip to Florida with an old friend I'd known since I was 2 and his twin sister. Their parents were supposed to arrive the next day and take them to Tampa Bay while I stayed in Miami with some friends. We rented a hotel room with 2 split areas, leaving us each with a room, one for me and one for the twins. That evening, as we were getting ready to go to dinner, the guys were ready, but we had to wait a bit longer for the sister. While we waited, my friend and I started talking about our high schools. I was attending an all-boys prep school, and he was at a very religious co-ed Christian school. He mentioned how some guys at his school engaged in rather unusual activities, which I found odd. We brushed off the conversation when his sister was finally ready, and we headed out for dinner. Later that night, we returned to the hotel, exhausted, and went to bed around 11 p.m. in our respective rooms. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to an odd noise above me. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but I quickly realized it was real and didn't know how to react. I pretended to be asleep, trying to ignore it. Then, out of nowhere, I faked a sneeze, which startled him, and he quickly backed off, accidentally injuring his leg on the table before hurrying back to his room. At around 3:30 a.m., I heard another sound and thought, "Oh no, not again." This time, I decided I needed to address it. I opened my eyes slightly and saw something completely unexpected. It wasn't what I thought at all. Instead, I saw the silhouette of the twin sister standing near me. She placed her finger on her lips, signaling me to stay quiet. After a moment, she returned to her room, leaving me feeling a mix of emotions as I fell back asleep. Around 4:15 a.m., I briefly woke up again, hearing faint sounds from their room. Too tired to fully process everything, I just went back to sleep. At around 8 a.m., their parents arrived, and the sister went to greet them, not realizing that she wasn't fully dressed until she opened the door. Her brother got out of bed as well, revealing the gash on his leg. They had a bit of explaining to do. Then the parents ventured into my room while I was still asleep, noticed some things out of place, and asked questions. We managed to convince them that nothing unusual had happened, and they assumed I'd met up with someone else that night. A few months later, I heard from my friend. His sister had some surprising news, and their family was dealing with the aftermath. I've barely spoken to them since, and I haven't had any similar experiences. Story 14. All right, I engage in self-inflicted pain sometimes, but not in a depressed or negative way. I'm actually a very happy and fulfilled person, and I feel incredibly fortunate. I don't feel like anything is missing in my life. It's just that the sensation of pain and seeing the evidence of it on my body fascinates me. I've been doing this on and off for maybe 6 or 7 years. I quickly realized that certain forms, like cutting, weren't a good idea due to scarring. I explained the few marks I have as accidental injuries from clumsiness. So instead, I've shifted to methods that cause bruising. I often bruise my arms by bumping them against edges or using small, harmless items around my workspace. Sometimes I'll even press my hands or legs against warm surfaces like radiators in the winter. Being young and in college, I can usually blame any visible bruises on minor accidents from a night out. The strange thing is, I've never struggled with depression or negative emotions, so this isn't a way of channeling any inner pain. I just find the experience fascinating and somehow comforting. I guess it could have some connection to certain preferences in relationships, though, because I've noticed that when I'm feeling brave or I'm in the right mindset, I'll ask my partner to play along with a bit of roughness, like hair pulling or playful slaps. Recently, though, this habit has started to feel like a challenge because I'm dating someone I genuinely like, and he once mentioned he had a past relationship with someone who self-harmed in a serious way, which was understandably hard for him. He's attentive and open to my preferences, and I appreciate that. But because of his past experience, I worry about how he'd react if he knew I occasionally do this to myself. For now, I brush off any questions by attributing my bruises to our more adventurous moments together, just with my closest friends and him. Sometimes he'll ask, "Did I really leave that mark?" And I get the feeling I should either tell him the truth or stop entirely and be content with just the marks from our time together. Story 15. I don't have regrets, but I've had a deeply close relationship with my sister for years. We grew up in a home that lacked affection, where we were often treated as though we were a burden our mom could hardly wait to be free of. Some people might assume I pressured my sister in some way, but there was no coercion, and my sister was always strong and intelligent enough to stand her ground. Growing up, our mom was strict and prevented us from socializing, making us spend almost all of our time at home unless we were at school. As a result, my sister and I became each other's support system. We relied on one another for companionship and comfort. Over time, our bond deepened, and while we knew our closeness was unusual, it became a source of strength. When I turned 18, my mom asked me to move out, which forced me to confront my feelings. I focused on building a stable life, finding a job, enrolling in college classes, and eventually making a good life for myself. I would still visit my sister occasionally, and she always expressed how much she missed having me around. During one visit, we realized that our connection had become more complicated than either of us had anticipated. We talked about it and decided to keep a bit of distance for a while, recognizing that we both needed space to grow independently. When my sister turned 18, our mom also asked her to move out, and she came to stay with me temporarily. The first night we were under the same roof again felt strange, so we had an open conversation about our feelings and the challenges we faced growing up. This understanding brought us closer, and we continued to support each other as we navigated adulthood. For a while, it almost felt like we were in a relationship, spending time together, sharing many experiences, and even talking about life goals. We were genuinely happy for the first time, finding comfort in our bond, but eventually, we realized the importance of moving on and decided to pursue separate paths. In the past few years, we've tried dating other people, though it hasn't been easy. Sometimes, our close bond makes it challenging to connect with others. We still talk on the phone frequently because in person, it's easy to fall back into old habits. We've considered moving to a place where we could live without judgment, just to be ourselves. Now we're both trying to find happiness, even if it's difficult to imagine it apart. We care deeply for each other, and that's something we're not willing to let go of entirely. We're just taking things one step at a time, knowing that we'll always be there for each other, no matter what. Story 16. This might not be the most shocking story, but it's one I've wanted to get off my chest for a while. A couple of years ago, I was up at a friend's dorm, and it was my first night trying hard liquor. Like a lot of people's first time, I underestimated its effects and quickly blacked out. There's a video on YouTube from that night that captures just how far gone I was, and I can't say it was a good look. What I remember from that night is pretty limited. Most of this story is pieced together from what my friends told me afterward. Apparently, things got so out of hand that the resident assistant, RA, stepped in and took me to the bathroom to help me calm down. I've been told that I started yelling things that seemed pretty outlandish in my state of confusion. My friends thought I was just joking around, so they didn't react to it. I woke up the next morning on the bathroom floor sore and disoriented. Not long after that, I noticed some discomfort and a recurring irritation. It's a minor health issue now, but it occasionally flares up and has me wondering if it's something I should address. However, I haven't wanted to check it out professionally, partly because I'm afraid of what I might find out, and part of me hopes it's just a random irritation. While this whole experience has left me with more questions than answers, I've learned my lesson about watching my limits when it comes to drinking. Sometimes it's better to play it safe and keep your night from becoming a mystery. Story 17. I must have been a curious kid back then, always trying to understand things that felt mysterious and unknown. I started having questions about topics like relationships and attraction when I was very young, around 8 years old. It was something that would come up occasionally on TV, and although I didn't fully understand it, my curiosity was sparked. Without access to a computer or the internet, the only thing I could do was imagine what it all meant. By the time I was a little older, around 10, I'd learned a few things from reading and TV, though I still didn't fully understand. For a long time, I kept my thoughts to myself, feeling too embarrassed to talk to anyone about them. It wasn't until I saw an article in the health section of a newspaper that I realized a lot of people probably had similar questions and experiences, and that it was all completely normal. When I was 14, my parents finally got me a computer, though we still didn't have internet. It was then that I began exploring some media that would deepen my understanding. But I was always careful, especially after a close call with my younger brother, who nearly caught me watching something private. After that, I became more cautious and deleted anything that might reveal my curiosity. At 16, when we finally had internet at home, the computer was set up in the living room, so I didn't feel comfortable browsing openly. Later, I convinced my parents to get me a laptop, which allowed me to privately explore topics that were interesting to me. I also started reading different kinds of stories online, and I found that fictional scenarios sometimes captured my interest more than anything else. But while I was aware that these interests were common, there were certain topics I didn't feel comfortable discussing with others. Now that I'm 18, I look back and realize that a lot of what I was curious about was completely normal for someone my age, even if I didn't realize it at the time. My friends and family see me as the good kid who is always focused on school, and they might be surprised to know the things that I wondered about. I was voted most likely to succeed in my class, and I take that seriously. I know now that it's okay to be curious and that everyone has private thoughts and questions that they might keep to themselves. We're all just human, after all. Story 18. When I was a kid, I had a best friend I'd known since birth. Our parents were also best friends, and we were born just 2 months apart. We did everything together, from playing games to spending nearly every day at each other's houses. We were practically inseparable for the first 6 years of our lives, and we even made up games where we would pretend to be different characters. One of our games involved playing a couple, which we just thought was harmless fun. As we got older, things changed. By the time I was in my early teens, my family was going through a tough time. My parents divorced, and it was a difficult period with a lot of emotional ups and downs. I found myself feeling isolated and looking for a sense of connection. My friend and I drifted apart a bit, but we still hung out occasionally. One day, while we were just hanging out, he pulled out his laptop and we ended up watching a video that sparked some confusing feelings for me. I realized that I felt closer to him than I did to most people, and I wondered if I might have deeper feelings for him. I didn't know what it meant, and it left me feeling confused. As we grew older, our lives took different paths. He became very popular in school and started hanging out with a new crowd, while I kept more to myself. I'd still think about him, though, wondering if my feelings were just a result of everything we went through together as kids. At times, I questioned whether this might mean I had feelings for him that went beyond friendship, but I was hesitant to say anything, even to my closest friends. I didn't want to risk our friendship or make things awkward between us. These feelings are still something I'm working through. It's hard because I'm part of a group where talking about feelings isn't exactly encouraged. My friends and I play football, and I don't know how they would react if I shared this side of myself. So for now, I'm just trying to figure things out on my own and understand my feelings. It's a journey, but I'm learning to accept that confusion is part of growing up. Story 19. I'm not sure this story would ruin anyone's life, but it might definitely change how my friends and family see me. Looking back to middle school, most of us had our own groups or cliques, and I was part of one too. But while everyone around me was just starting to discover their interests and boundaries, I was learning something different about myself. I had a strong impulse to take things that didn't belong to me. It all started small, at a local deli. I would find ways to discreetly take small items like a bag of chips or a candy bar. At first, it was just about testing boundaries, but over time I began to turn it into a little side business, selling treats at school. My friends didn't think much of it. They just saw me as the kid who always had extra snacks. Eventually, I started taking larger items and even selling popular products at school, and I found a thrill in being able to go unnoticed. As I got older, I decided to test my skills at larger stores like department stores, and even came up with strategies to make sure I wouldn't get caught. My friends thought I was clever, but they never really knew the full extent of what I was up to. Around this time, I also became close with a friend who would help me with my adventures. We didn't get into trouble, but I did start to realize that I was more interested in the excitement than anything else. I even made up disguises to keep things interesting, thinking of it as a challenge to see how much I could blend in. Eventually, I realized that while the money was nice, it wasn't worth the risk. I made the decision to stop entirely, though I still look back on those days as a reminder of how easy it is to slip into risky habits. I don't condone stealing, and I definitely don't recommend going down that path. It can easily lead to negative consequences and bigger problems down the road. Now, I've left that part of my life behind. I understand the importance of honesty and respect for others' property, and I'm grateful for the lessons I learned. It's a part of my past, and while I don't regret the journey, I'm glad to have moved on. Story 20. I dated a girl for about 11 months as I was entering my freshman year of high school. We were really close, and things were going well. During spring break, I went on a beach trip with a few friends, but she wasn't able to join us. One evening, while I was out with the spring break crowd, I met someone, and in a moment of poor judgment, we ended up kissing. Up until that night, I'd been faithful and hadn't even considered being with anyone else. I chalked it up to a one-time mistake and decided to keep it to myself, thinking it was a momentary lapse. Unfortunately, one of my so-called friends from that trip told my girlfriend what had happened, adding in exaggerated details. The breakup that followed was messy and dramatic. It felt like everyone at school was talking about it. I could tell I had hurt her deeply, and I wished I had handled things differently, but for some reason, I could never bring myself to talk it through with her. Several months later in August, I received an emotional phone call from a mutual friend. Through her sobs, I realized that my ex was in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. I rushed there, but by the time I arrived, she was in critical condition. Within minutes, a nurse came out to tell me the devastating news that she hadn't made it. It was a shocking, overwhelming moment, and I ended up being the one to call our classmates to let them know. Since that day, I've struggled with a lingering sense of guilt, wondering if I caused her any unnecessary pain before she passed. I haven't been able to start another relationship, as I fear making similar mistakes that could hurt someone else. It's been a process, but I'm working on finding closure and learning to forgive myself, while also reminding myself to treat others with care and honesty. Story 21. When I was 20, I entered into a relationship with a woman significantly older than me. She was 24 years my senior and had 2 grown children close to my age. It was a challenging and somewhat dysfunctional situation, and after a while, we eventually parted ways. Now I'm living a much more balanced life. Her daughter was about 4 years younger than me, and we had a complicated relationship. She was going through a rough patch, and while we often clashed, I couldn't help but feel a certain attraction. She would live with us off and on, usually coming back whenever she needed some stability. Years later, she got her life together, went to college, and even started dating her professor. I'd sometimes help her with tech issues, and during one of these instances, I stumbled across some personal photos and videos she'd saved. While I found myself drawn to them at the time, I eventually put them aside and moved on. Looking back, I realized how complex that time was, navigating relationships and boundaries in a challenging environment. It's been a journey, but today, I'm grateful for the lessons learned and the growth that came out of those experiences. Story 22. I'm tired all the time. I hear voices constantly. I feel a deep exhaustion, always, as if there's a weight I can't shake. I want to be a person who claims his place in the world, who becomes independent and builds a life of his own. I want a place where I can pursue real goals and find success. I want friends, people I can relax with, laugh with, people who make life feel light and normal. I want to learn, to study, and to move forward without the constant worry of depression or reality slipping away. At times, I think my desire for change is just a step toward becoming different. In my mind, I imagine an environment where I can freely express these intense thoughts, where my dark, vivid ideas could be shared without judgment. Part of me believes that reaching out to a therapist or psychiatrist could help me focus on my goals and stop feeling like everything is hopeless. However, living in a small suburb, mental health care feels impossible to access. It's expensive. $150 or more per week is hard to afford. I've wondered if a long-term facility could help, as sometimes I feel like I'm carrying a lot that I can't manage alone. Sometimes I don't seek help because it feels out of reach, like the system is set up to keep you on record without providing real support. I know therapy is costly, and I feel a constant pressure to act as if everything is fine, to present a persona that seems confident. But deep down, I'd like to talk to someone, to feel understood, and to work through these struggles with people who relate. In America, getting support means having the funds to pay for it and the ability to show a brave face. At times, I feel like I'm looking out across a vast expanse, unable to connect with anything on the other side. It's isolating. The closest I've felt to being understood was while watching the first season of Dexter. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing someone with struggles similar to my own, someone who was trying to navigate intense, conflicting feelings. I just wish there were more people who truly understood. Story 23. I suppose it's fair to say that I've had an interesting life. It wasn't just one event that made it unique, but rather a series of experiences that left a lasting impact on me. Growing up, I faced challenges that shaped who I am. There was a lot of tension at home, and I often felt torn between wanting to connect with my family and struggling with the ways we all seemed different from others. My dad was a complicated person. Sometimes he was the most supportive, funny, and smart person I knew, while other times his darker moods made things difficult. He had his own struggles, and unfortunately, those challenges affected all of us. As a kid, I became highly sensitive to my surroundings. I learned to adapt, sometimes feeling like I was two different people depending on whether times were good or bad at home. As I entered my teens, I often found myself dealing with a lot of pent-up feelings and questions. Like most teenagers, I had a need to understand the world around me, even if that meant exploring boundaries in ways that might seem unusual to others. Curiosity often got the better of me, and I sometimes found myself diving into things just to understand them better. I also spent a lot of time rescuing stray animals, nursing them back to health, and finding them good homes. I was known among friends as someone who was kind and willing to stand up for others. While life at home was unpredictable, I tried to create a safe space for others and valued the friendships I built. When I was about 17, my dad suffered a serious injury that drastically changed our lives. He ended up taking a lot of prescribed medication, and it wasn't long before he struggled with dependency. It was tough to see him in pain and to watch him deal with it in ways that only caused more tension. His injury marked the beginning of a tough time for my family as he faced the end of his career and began to lose his way. We all felt the impact as he wrestled with his own battles, and the household became a difficult place to be. In my late teens, I started going out more often. I found solace in music, raves, and new friendships. I loved the feeling of connection I got from being around others who were open and accepting. And for the first time, I felt a sense of belonging. Hallucinogens and other substances were part of that scene, and they helped me feel more comfortable in my own skin. It was a time of self-discovery, and I found a way to escape, even temporarily, from the stresses of home. Looking back, I realized that these experiences taught me resilience. They made me more empathetic and aware of others, and they showed me the importance of seeking connection and understanding. Life hasn't always been easy, but I'm grateful for the journey and the people I've met along the way. Story 24. This story is about how I unexpectedly fell for someone I met online, someone connected to me through marriage. My wife has a big family, and on one visit to California, I met several of her relatives who play online games. Through them, I was introduced to one of their cousins who I hadn't met in person but quickly became close to as an online gaming buddy. We started talking daily, covering everything from life and relationships to our interests, like music. I'd always wanted to learn the violin, and she played, which fascinated me. For about a year, we chatted nearly every day, sharing a lot about our lives. During this time, I was going through some rough patches in my marriage, and when my wife left to visit her family for 6 weeks, my connection with this friend grew even stronger. One day, after many long conversations and shared interests, I finally told her I was developing feelings for her. I admitted that I knew it would never work, that I was already part of her extended family by marriage, and that this was an impossible situation. She understood but didn't feel the same way, so we moved past it and continued chatting as friends. Even after that, our friendship was still going strong. We'd game, chat, and share stories, and she'd send pictures and little messages that kept our connection alive. One day, she gave me her login info to help with something on one of her accounts. I acted impulsively and used her information to log into her social media, trying to learn more about her. Unfortunately, this triggered a security alert with my location, and it was clear it was me. I initially tried to cover it up, but I eventually confessed, realizing it was a bad decision. That was the end of our friendship. She decided it was best we stopped talking, and I agreed. But to this day, I can't help but miss our friendship. I felt a rare connection with her, and it's hard not to think about those days we spent talking and gaming together. If my wife knew, it would be a serious blow to our relationship. And I also know that for this friend, getting involved in something like this would mean a lot of family complications. So I keep it to myself, even though it's something I still think about. Story 25. I made a new account just to post this because I've never shared this story with anyone before. When I was a young child, around 5 or 6, my older cousin invited me to play games with her. At the time, I didn't understand much about what we were doing, but looking back, it left a strong impression on me. As I grew older, I occasionally acted out things I had experienced with other friends, not fully grasping what it all meant. Over time, I began to feel uncomfortable and conflicted about it. Around age 9 or 10, I moved to a new area and made a close friend, and we ended up spending a lot of time together. But something shifted in me. I started to feel guilt and confusion about things I didn't fully understand. Going to church, hearing messages about right and wrong, I began feeling ashamed and decided I wanted to stop. My friend didn't take it well, and we drifted apart after that. I carried this guilt with me for a long time and kept it all to myself, which only made it harder. By the time I was a little older, my brother and I had grown close, especially as we both navigated the challenges of growing up in a difficult family environment. We shared a lot and supported each other, but I sometimes felt haunted by past memories and struggled with feelings of shame. In middle school, I reached a breaking point. I was overwhelmed by guilt and sadness, feeling as if I had let down the people I cared about. In a moment of desperation, I confided in my parents, trying to explain why I felt so lost and ashamed. However, I didn't fully tell them everything. I was afraid of what they would think. Over time, I've struggled with these emotions and feelings of regret. I've talked with others who have gone through difficult situations and feel conflicted, wondering if I've done the right thing by staying silent. Now, my brother is my best friend, and I'm close to my family. I haven't spoken to the friends I knew as a child, and it feels as if it was all part of a different life. But the memories remain, and I'm working on coming to terms with them and finding peace. Story 26. At a young age, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I spent months, even years, moving in and out of mental institutions. It's unsettling to think about how some of the patients were treated back then. They tried to keep me on medication, but I didn't like how it made me feel, so I stopped taking it. Regardless of the medication they gave me, or whether I took it, the voices never left. I learned to manage it on my own. Over time, I realized that these voices weren't all bad. Some even tried to help or guide me. Others just wanted someone to listen. At first, the schizophrenia diagnosis seemed to explain everything. The memory loss that would last for days, sometimes weeks. The voices, the extreme changes in my behavior as a child. As I grew older and began living on my own, after many difficult years, I decided to seek help again. Why not, right? My family already viewed me as a lost cause. This struggle had cost me nearly everything, and after a few unsuccessful attempts to end it all, I figured I might as well give it another try. This time, I was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, DID. I had no idea what DID really meant, so I began to research it quietly. I went through a few weeks of therapy, but it didn't seem to help much, so I stopped. There are 9 of us in total. If you met me in person, you'd never suspect it. While we're having a conversation, I've likely already sized you up. I can tell what kind of person you are within minutes. Part of me wants to be your best friend, to help you in any way I can. Another part of me is darker, filled with anger at humanity. Sometimes our conversation feels casual, just another exchange with a stranger. Often I don't remember the details the next day or even later that afternoon. I've spent countless nights awake, talking to myself, understanding far more than I ever wanted to. I've come to consciousness at a traffic light, in the middle of a conversation, or sitting alone, crying in a corner. I've felt numb, disconnected from all emotion. At my lowest, I hurt myself just to know I could still feel. I've lain beside women I cared about, haunted by voices telling me to leave. I've talked my way out of situations that could have destroyed my life, like a prison sentence that could have kept me locked away for decades. Somehow, I've always managed to get through. I've learned to live with it. The transitions between my different selves feel normal to me now, and no one around me seems to notice. Over time, I've even managed to get the others to work with me as a team. We share our thoughts and memories. I've never told anyone about this disorder that's taken so much from me, but, in a strange way, has also given me a unique strength. I fear that if I ever did tell anyone, I'd end up in a psychiatric hospital again. My friends and family wouldn't understand, and it would make achieving my dreams nearly impossible. And so here I am, sharing this with strangers online, people who will never know my face or my name. To all of you, my anonymous friends, thank you for listening. Good night and good luck. Story 27. This will probably go unnoticed, especially since this is an old thread, and it's nowhere near as severe as what others have gone through. But I still feel like sharing it. My older brother has left a lasting impression on almost everyone he meets. Whether it's his peers, teachers, or parents, almost every person who encounters him seems to revere him. Being the younger sibling, I'm always expected to live up to the standards he set. I try my best, but I can never seem to have that same charm he effortlessly displays. The thing is, I've never seen that charm when we're alone. Throughout my childhood, my brother would physically abuse me and my sister. Unfortunately, he was stronger than both of us combined, so we were at his mercy. We'd run to our parents for help, only to be met with laughter. They'd say things like, "Well, why would you provoke him?" Apparently, lying on my own bed in the room we shared was enough to provoke him. For 15 years, my sister and I endured this, well, my sister only for about 12 years, until my brother finally went off to college. But the damage was done. I have this intense, irrational fear of big-boned men now, and it's hindered me from forming normal relationships. Yes, I have friends, but they're not close friendships. The only person I genuinely feel comfortable around is my sister. My sister and I have coped in different ways. I've had moments where I thought about ending it all. I never attempted it, but I came close. My sister, though, has turned to drugs and reckless behavior, and I'm doing everything I can to help her. But I can't go to our parents about it. If she finds out I talked to anyone, I'd lose her trust and she might even run away. She's only 14. I worry that if I don't step in soon, something terrible might happen to her. We've already tried talking to our parents about our brother's behavior, but they refuse to believe that they could have made a mistake as parents. They criticize me for being awkward in conversations, and they judge my sister for wearing revealing clothes and staying out past 9 on weekends. And that's part of my sister's struggle. She can't distinguish between our parents' petty rules and actions that could genuinely ruin her life. I also have issues with memories, not in terms of remembering facts or things like muscle memory, but actual memories from my childhood. I can only recall 3 or 4, and the rest are just things I've memorized from what my parents told me, in case I need to reference them in a situation. Since my brother left for college, I've started forming more memories. I don't know if it's related, but who knows? Meanwhile, I'm stuck listening to everyone praise my brother, wondering why I can't be more like him.